Welcome to the China Desk Podcast, presented by the Federal Newswire, with your host, Steve Yates.
Welcome to the China Desk Podcast, episode 21. I'm your host, Steve Yates, Senior Fellow at the America First Policy Institute and Chair of the China Policy Initiative. A reminder to our audience, for whom we are most grateful, viewers can watch the China Desk on YouTube or subscribe to hear all our interviews on Apple, Google, Spotify, and most other podcast providers. You can always access our podcasts at thefederalnewswire.com. My guest today is Kimberly Reed. Kimberly served as the first woman chair of the board of directors, president, and CEO of the Export-Import Bank of the United States from 2019 to 2021. She led bipartisan efforts to secure EXIM's historic 7-year congressional reauthorization, the longest in the bank's history, which included a significant new focus, the Program on China and Transformational Exports, to bolster U.S. business competitiveness, specifically with respect to the People's Republic of China. She received the U.S. Department of Defense's highest civilian award, the Medal for Distinguished Public Service, for her efforts to increase U.S. economic and national security. Kimberly currently serves on the board of directors of several public companies and is a distinguished fellow at the Council on Competitiveness. She was also president of the International Food Information Council Foundation, senior advisor to U.S. Treasury Secretaries Henry Paulson and John W, CEO of the Community Development Financial Institutions Fund, and counsel to 3 committees in the U.S. Congress, where she conducted oversight and investigations. Kimberly, welcome to the China Desk. Let's jump in.
Great to be with you, Steve.
Wonderful to have you here. At the outset of every one of our conversations, we try to give our audience a little bit of a feel for what brought our guests to this point in time where they're talking about these weird and wild topics like international economics, banking, China, the U.S. Not everyone grew up or was asked in elementary school, what do you want to be? And said, I want to lead the Export-Import Bank of the United States of America. So let's talk a little bit. I know some from our conversations and friendship that you have done some interesting things and have a wide range of interests in politics that kind of led up into this realm. But without me letting the cat out of the bag, why don't you give us a little bit about how you came up out of your educational background and into this interesting space?
Absolutely. And Steve, I'll just start that by saying it was great to be with you in South Dakota. South Dakota Trade sponsored a Midwest Agriculture Export Summit in August in Sioux Falls. And we were there talking about a lot of different topics. And obviously, national security is even part of the world of agriculture today. So I was on a panel that talked about food security. And but it comes back around to this common theme that brings us together today, and that is keeping America strong. I'm from rural West Virginia. I grew up in a small town, Buchanan, West Virginia, 6,000 people. Grew up on a farm. And was pre-med in undergrad at West Virginia Wesleyan College. But I took this one course by my favorite professor, Dr. Rupp, and it was called Kennedy Catholicism in the 1960 West Virginia primary. And we studied the history of this pivotal election and what it took for Kennedy to win the United States. And this one experience where my professor challenged me as a young, I was probably 19 years old, to interview West Virginia's sitting Secretary of State, Ken Heffler, and get some original primary research on this campaign from 1960. And so I was at the Capitol interviewing this man and learned so much. And from that, I decided my path's not medicine. It's probably law and politics. So I went on to West Virginia University Law School and moved to Washington as soon as I graduated. Worked on the Dole Kemp 1996 campaign and met a lot of people in Washington. If you're a young person watching this podcast, that network that you make from early years in your career serves you well your whole life. If you're a hard worker, you're loyal, you're focused, trustworthy, all of these important traits that anyone would want in an employee. So from the Dole Kemp campaign, I soon found myself on Capitol Hill. working for 3 different committees doing oversight and investigations. And that's very important as you look at topics like governance and following the law and just making sure that Congress is informed on what's happening within the government, also within the private sector, and understanding those dynamics. So did diverse hearings and loved that. And 3 very different committees, the Education and Workforce Committee, looking at the future of the workplace. This was the late 90s. So what's going to be happening in the 21st century and what issues are a challenge for America? A lot of those issues are still issues, and let's hope that we resolve a lot of them so that we get stronger and stronger. From there, I went to the House Government Reform Committee, which has wide-ranging jurisdiction. You can look at anything and hold hearings on anything. And so, wow, I learned a lot, from learning how to do congressional subpoenas to document production to staffing the members. Very important skills as a young lawyer. And then finally ended up on the House Ways and Means Committee, which is, I think, the most powerful committee in the House because it deals with trade, health, Social Security, taxes, a lot of important topics. And I was at that committee when 9/11 happened. So one example of a hearing that I did was after 9/11. The Red Cross was in the crosshairs because it was doing things that maybe this nonprofit federally chartered group should not be doing. And so we had held investigations into that. But you may remember Enron at the time, a lot of different topics. From that, I got a phone call from the White House in 2004 asking me if I'd like to be in the front office at the Treasury Department as senior advisor to the Treasury Secretary. And I didn't pursue that. I guess people were watching and recommending. Again, that's advice I give to all young people. Work hard and your path will happen. And so I took a job working for a man named John Snow. He was previously CEO of CSX Railroad. So you learn so much being around amazing people. And when you're dealing with the U.S. economic system and the global economy and all these key issues, very, very informative. And then a new Treasury Secretary came on, Henry Paulson, Hank Paulson, and he'd previously been the CEO of Goldman Sachs. So totally different personality and background, but it was fascinating to learn from him as well. And I would say I'm glad that he was in place after I'd left Treasury, when we had something called the economic crisis of 2008. So watched how he handled that from the outside. But as you mentioned, at Treasury, variety of issues. But I wanted to get line management experience before leaving the Bush administration. And so I headed Treasury's only grant program called the Community Development Financial Institutions Fund, which puts capital and tax credits into poor parts of our country to help with economic development and job creation. So it took me back to my roots of rural West Virginia, I would say. From there,
that's awesome.
Yep. So from there, I went to the private sector, and I went up to New York City and worked for the firm that actually ended up going bankrupt just quickly thereafter during the financial crisis, Lehman Brothers. So learned what it was like to be in the middle of something horrific, and how the economic situation can turn so quickly if you don't have good processes and good governance in place. And from that, I was looking to stay in New York, but I got a job offer from an organization in Washington dealing with food and agriculture. And you may remember me saying I was a pre-med biology and chemistry focused undergrad. And I'm like, food and ag, what's this have to do with this path that I've just described that I'm on? But sometimes those doors come to you, opportunities come to you, and had the head of nutrition from McDonald's, from Mars, from Elanco, which is an animal health company, had them all saying, we really want you to come and help us talk about the facts and science on food. And you're an agent of change. So I decided to take a big leap and moved back to Washington and headed this organization that was fascinating and interesting and a very dynamic time as our population increases. We have more mouths to feed. And how do we make sure America is doing that in a great way? And how do we help the world be focused on that, but based on facts and not activists' initiatives, I would say. And so help everyone communicate the science and facts on those topics. And it was great fun. And that took me around the world and put me into organizations like the United Nations, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and some global summits that then became very relevant when President Trump got elected.
Well, before we get there, I do want to recap a few of these areas that you've introduced, because I think it is important and it helps people understand that when we're talking about this, when people think, if they know what the Export-Import Bank is, they're going to think of a banker, not an inaccurate description of the industry that it plays in. But I, at least personally, saw your tenure there as an important transition point, because there were so many transitions happening during the Trump years in terms of what was happening in the world, where priorities were placed in decision making. We had political forces that were kind of new, with populism playing a role and maybe calling into question some assumptions about trade, and there are some shifts out there. So I think it's a really important predicate for the audience to understand that you actually had some really interesting political background, but also some interesting human background and subject matters that probably most other leaders of the Export-Import Bank would not have had to kind of think about a very different comprehensive challenge from a place like the People's Republic of China. So when one of the things that we try to emphasize in every one of our conversations and episodes is that the malign influences of the Communist Party of China are comprehensive. They don't just stay in the national security cone or the trade cone or the communications and public relations cone. That there are many different areas where this challenge can come. And it takes people with kind of a different breadth of experience to step in and make leadership decisions that put us on the right footing, so that we don't lean into conflict, but we're in a much stronger position to compete, and hopefully, but thereby minimizing risk and increasing better options for our people and our country. And so everything from your food and ag background and what you knew from West Virginia politics, I think probably grounded you in a way for that time in the Trump years, in ways that if you just gone through personnel central casting for the Export-Import Bank, there's no question you were going to be qualified anyway. But my knowledge of who tended to be going through those lanes weren't people that knew kind of the community from the grassroots up in West Virginia, knew some of these other industries and other kinds of things. So I think that was something that's to your credit. But let's go turn a little bit from my being your personal cheerleader to switching into this time in the Trump administration. Everybody would know some of the pop and sizzle about the campaign and the transition and going into those years. But talk a little bit about how you came in, kind of what your mandate was. Maybe share with us if there were any adjustments. You plop down into the lead office and you get to know the place that you're leading a bit more. What were some of the kind of big adjustments to translating from an expert with experience on the Hill and some of these other areas to now I'm leading this agency? And what is this agency?
Absolutely. So the Export-Import Bank was created in 1934. And so it's been around for a long time. And the mission is supporting U.S. jobs through U.S. exports. And I am a Republican and interned when I was in law school at a think tank called the Heritage Foundation, and have been involved in Republican circles for many years. And I'd never really focused on the Export-Import Bank because I always heard it being referred to as the Bank of Crony Capitalism, or the Bank of Corporate Welfare, or the Bank of Boeing. And so when presidential personnel called me up and said, we want to talk to you about a job, and they said, we think all your background and experience perfectly knits together to go to the Export-Import Bank, I was surprised. And I'm like, didn't President Trump oppose that during the campaign? And they said, yes, he did. And I'm like, so what happened? And they said he met with CEOs of companies who told him, we're getting our clocks cleaned by China. China was doing something called the Belt and Road Initiative all around the world and building out infrastructure in foreign countries. And sometimes they would use their XM, and they have at least two, maybe more XMs to help them do financing of deals. And so they said, he changed his mind, and we think you would be great there. And so I'm like, let me go home and think about it. But I've always heard and believed when you are asked to serve, maybe it comes from a higher calling at some time, or often, or always. And so, the president asked me to do this. So I thought, I'm going to do it. And so XM, as I said, was started in 1934 and has a great mission. And so what it does, it gives financing. So we have foreign buyers all around the world. The United States has a great domestic marketplace where we're selling goods and services. But 95% of the consumers in the world are outside of the United States. And some companies excel at that global exporting and trading and business, and some are new to it. And it's a huge opportunity going forward for the future of the world. And so XM provides financing to the foreign buyer. If a foreign buyer has a hard time getting a loan from a normal bank to buy a made in the USA good or service, they can apply to the U.S. Export-Import Bank. And the standard is reasonable assurance of repayment. They also, maybe a private sector bank will give them a loan to buy a made in the USA good or service, but it's a little risky deal for that private sector bank. So they're going to say, we need the U.S. government through XM to guarantee the loan. So we do lending and then guarantees. And then for mainly small businesses, I would say we have this product called export credit insurance, where you're making goods and services in the U.S., you send them off to foreign countries, but something happens. Say the ship goes down, say the foreign buyer doesn't pay, make good on their deal. The U.S. buyer can take out an export credit insurance policy with XM to make them whole if something bad happens. So that's generally, we do more things than that, but that's just the general sense of it. And so I became the nominee and very excited, but the dynamic soon happened that I didn't appreciate. And that is, I had 100% Democrat support as Trump's nominee. And I had the majority of Republican support. But there are a few Republicans and true believers in the free market system who think that it's not the role of government to intervene in the private marketplace. They think it distorts markets, and so this few amount of Republican senators had blocked the nominees to the Export-Import Bank board for about 4 years, effectively shutting down the bank. And because you need a bank board to vote on deals at the time over $10 million. And the U.S. Export-Import Bank under law can be lending at any one time, making loans, $135 billion. And so by not confirming nominees like me, the bank basically shut down, except to really small stuff. And so I became the nominee, and it took 2.5 years to get confirmed, even though I was confirmed 79-17, which is a pretty awesome vote. I needed 51 votes, but it took a lot of conversations. And that's where my Hill experience came in, because staffing members of Congress, you understand the priorities and the tensions and all of this. And so I appreciated having conversations with some Republicans like Senator Tom Cotton, who is a China hawk, and he understands what the People's Republic of China is doing through his Belt and Road Initiative. And so I helped him understand how USXM could help be a solution for that. So that's just one example. But anyway, finally got confirmed, got to work in May of 2019, had to reopen an agency. And think about if you're a career civil servant and your agency's been basically shuttered for 4 years and handcuffed. A lot of the talent had left. The staff was demoralized. And Trump, when he swore me in at the Oval Office, the vice president administered the oath. But the president was right there with me, and he said, you're going to take this organization to new heights, and you're going to help more people buy those beautiful made in the USA goods and services. And so he wanted this done. And so that was my order. And so got in there, hired great staff, started working hard, had to get our organization reauthorized, had to try to bring customers back to us, had to deal with COVID and shutting down the office. So I'm running the Export-Import Bank from right here. Yeah. And then started traveling again around the world, because the world, while we were gone for 4 years, Germany, France, Italy, Canada, their XMs all came in and took a lot of business, because foreign buyers don't have to buy made in the USA goods or services. If you need a loan to buy something, you're going to go where the loan is, and you might buy the goods from that. So they took away a lot of this business from XM, and even some U.S. companies who needed that to have their buyer have the financing started putting foreign parts in their machinery and planes and other things to help the world buy American as best they could. But they ended up going to these other countries. And I know that we don't like that, right? I want American workers making and selling as much as we can. And we can be doing so much more. So had an amazing experience. We'll talk more about it, but that's just kind of a starting point for all of this.
Well, it's a really important background. And I think that the number one area that want to try to elucidate for the audience is that focus on China. I mean, when you look at what the mandate for Export-Import Bank is, and sort of filling that gap to try to get made in America goods sold, one of the big subsidizers and other sort of systemic supporters of the competition is China. And so finding out how do we help American companies and providers compete in that kind of an environment, clearly an important strategic priority. But you had this focus on the program on China and transformational exports. Why don't you help us unpack a little bit about what the program was? What does this transformational exports mean?
Sure. So after I was confirmed in May of 2019, in December of 2019, a lot of people might not appreciate, we have to get programs in the federal government reauthorized by Congress, or the program ends. So that's why it's so important that he'll get its job done by reviewing and passing legislation, either passing it or ending it, but giving clarity not only to the government, but also to buyers around the world, because XM needed to be reauthorized. And so I worked really hard. President Trump helped. He came in really high, and working with those senators and congressmen on the Hill in this reauthorization that happened in December of 2019, December 20th, 2019, I went out to Andrews Air Force Base because the president signed into law the creation of the U.S. Space Force. And then he signed into law the longest reauthorization in the history of XM, which was for 7 years. But as part of getting that done, a new program was put into the legislation, and I was mandated to establish a program on China and transformational exports. And that legislation said, of XM's $135 billion lending capability, we want XM to do at least 20% of that, or $37 billion in lending to foreign buyers, so they neutralize China, pick America, and advance America's comparative leadership in the world. So that is a daunting task. How do you set something up, from scratch and help the world not only come back to the bank and have confidence that the bank is going to last for a long time, so that they pick us versus another country? But then how do you find those deals when you're reading about places like the country of Djibouti having a port financed by China, and then the country not paying up on its loan and the Chinese acquiring the asset. Same with the port in Sri Lanka. I was with the Prime Minister of Greece. We went through the port of Piraeus, totally lined with Chinese, all Chinese. So this is happening all around the world in large items, small items, radar systems at an airport in Uganda. I know very recently in the Solomon Islands, the 5G communication system, Chinese financed. And so how do you get into these countries that are very important to what you're an expert at, Steve, national security? And how do you say to them, buy American? So the legislation gave the U.S. Export-Import Bank the flexibility to match the rates, terms, and conditions that the People's Republic of China would be offering for the deal. So we could match the financing. And everyone around the world says the U.S. makes the best, highest quality goods and services. We have an outstanding reputation for that. And so that that new capability that we had is a tool that is not only important to economic security, but national security. So transformational exports. The legislation also says we want you to focus in on 10 key areas. And these are ones that every national security expert talks about all the time. AI, quantum computing, but also things like biotechnology, which me coming from the world of food and ag, I spent a lot of time talking around the world about the importance of U.S. biotechnology crops to help produce more in the world, but also pharmaceuticals, so renewable energy, a lot of different categories, but in the whole, important in national security. So set up this program, created the very first national security advisor who advised me, recruited a great guy, David Trulio, who's now president of the Reagan Library in California, but I recruited him over from the Department of Defense to set up this program for me. It's now being led by a great career civil servant, Adam Frost. So set that up. Still need Congress to give funding for this program. So that's still not happened yet because, again, this program was created when Congress was not doing their annual appropriations bills. They were doing continuing resolutions. And so you can get authorized to do something, but if Congress doesn't give you money for it in their appropriation cycle, because they just kind of keep doing the same thing every year, makes it really tough. So I hope for big things for this program. I'm not there now. I left on January 20th, 2021, but I want to see them doing a lot more. I did do the largest deal in Exim's history, and here's an example. Country of Mozambique. Have you spent time in Mozambique? Are you familiar with that?
I have not. I do know where it is, but I have not spent a lot of time there.
So Mozambique was getting ready to tap into their liquefied natural gas reserves off the coast of Mozambique. And when they were getting ready to do that, it would transform the country. It would give a lot of good things to this poor part of the world. And guess what they were going to do? They were going to use Chinese and Russian Exim to do an equipment to do this. And as soon as I got confirmed and reopened the bank, they came to us and said, we'd rather buy U.S. And so largest deal in Exim's history, $3.4 billion, then $3.7 billion deal to buy a company called Air Products, which is headquartered in Pennsylvania, and LNG exchange equipment. And so we were brought into this project along with a couple other countries like Korea to go and do this in a very challenging part of the world. And aren't you glad that America got that purchase done instead of China and Russia getting the benefit of that? I know those American workers, and I met some of them because I touched the LNG equipment, exchange equipment down at Port Manatee, Florida, before it got put on a boat and sent over to Mozambique. But so setting up a big program like this is huge, but it's also raising awareness. So happy to take a break, and then we can talk more about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just a really, really important way of translating what to a lot of people is a concept of a particular part of the U.S. government that could come across as somewhat sterile numbers on a page. And you're talking about real life impact on people and countries overseas where there is this strategic competition for resources, and countries are going to have to make choices based on what's there. And I think you're exactly right that if America is going to have stronger allies and kind of shape the world in a way that puts us in a better position to compete and hopefully overcome challenges that come from things like the Communist Party of China today, but anywhere. We need these kind of cooperative things out there. Also, just this idea of here you're talking about this timeline. People know of political timelines. You're talking about 2017 through the very, very beginning of 2021 is sort of the sand in the hourglass for one term of an administration. And you're coming in kind of that second half of that first term kind of period,
I had 20
having
months.
fought hard to just get in and get started. And you make a splash with a move on a big deal and doing some of the work to bring that together. Kind of begs a question as we sort of shift into where we go from here. There's been a talk when it comes to trade and some of the foreign policy issues with U.S. China, where there's been some areas of continuity. When you look at the State Department, late in the Trump term, Secretary Pompeo identified a genocide as having occurred in Xinjiang against the Uyghur population. And the new Biden administration has affirmed that. There's been an area of continuity. When it came to our friend Bob Lighthizer, tariffs that were put in place to try to rebalance the trade relationship with China, there in many cases has been more continuity than change. Maybe it hasn't gone forward as much as we would like in the current environment, but the transformational approach that Bob brought to USTR, there's been some continuity. And so when we look at what you are doing with, I think, this unique and important new mandate at Export-Import Bank, you certainly put the framework in place for continuity. You've alluded to one of the challenges of the awesome sausage-making process that is appropriations and decision-making in Congress being one of those areas of question. But have you sensed any difference from the new leadership of your successors in taking things in a different direction? Is it really sort of the roadblocks on the hill? Or is this another one of those areas where you and your colleagues put kind of a strategic direction in place that's still leaning in that direction, and so there's hope for more continuity going forward?
So I'm not there anymore, and
Right.
I've never met in person with my successor. I've reached out, and I left a great track record for anyone who wants to understand during my tenure. So there, and I'm just going to pull this up here. If you go to XM's website, there are reports, and I did 2 annual reports and 2 global competitiveness reports, and it tracks what we attempted to do in this foundation we attempted to build, because I had bankers from around the world, I had businesses from around the world tell me, "You're unpredictable. You're not, we don't know if you're going to exist or not. And why should we pick you?" Like, could you imagine if you went to your local bank and it's open one day, shut one day, doesn't have money one day? It's like it's sometimes millions of dollars just on the application, because XM has the standard of reasonable assurance of repayment. And we need to make sure that when we do lending, we get repaid back with interest and fees that over many years has totaled a lot of money that we then give to the U.S. Treasury that is used for deficit reduction, which is very important, right? XM is not a money-making entity. That's not our mission. Our mission is to support U.S. jobs through exports. But when we're fully functional, we are making money. We're bringing in money and giving it back to the Treasury because we have very low default rate, less than 2%, which is the envy of the private sector world. And so hopefully the foundation I put in place, it's good. I know that we started on something at the end of the Trump administration internally, looking at how can we really help every business in the United States export more, and looked really hard at the statute and started doing research on how this could increase. And I had an initiative called All America Initiative. So during COVID, I wanted every single business that should be exporting in the United States know about the tool of XM. We're not the end all and be all. We are a tool in the trade toolbox, but I wanted them to know. So I hooked up with every state chamber of commerce did events in all 50 states, and really tried to get that knowledge out either directly or through community banks, for example, and even through credit unions. I did an MOU signing with Rodney Hood, the head of the National Credit Union Association, letting small businesses know when they walk in the door needing financing to take this next great step, Ex-Im could be there for them. And so one initiative that my successor has taken on is Make More in America. So we started the research for that. So how can we support through financing, getting those made in the USA goods and services to market, and getting what's made in the ground or at a factory, what's needed to get it from there to a port or to an airplane to get it all around the world. So they do have something called Make More in America. And I think it would be interesting to explore the language in our charter that says import, because as we look at something like critical minerals, and Steve, I know you're all over this as a national security expert, but critical minerals, rare earth minerals, something very important, and love to see those be processed here in the United States. We need those
Absolutely.
to make those semiconductor chips that makes everything in our iPhones and so much technology in the United States work. So maybe in the future, we'll have a change of administration and we'll see some very creative and deep thinking on what's needed to go to the next level to ensure the U.S. and U.S. companies have that backing to do what we can. I also I'm constantly reading news articles. And so I just read, I don't know if you know what the Epoch Times is, but I really recommend that for everyone. And so on the 6th of September, Thomas McCardle wrote an article, The China-Mexican Drug Cartel, Shoplifting Connection. And Tom, who I know personally because I hired him as my chief speechwriter at Ex-Im. I'm so proud of him now, writing articles like this. But so China is doing a lot that we need to be aware about, and you need to look at what we have the tools for. And Ex-Im can support anti-narcotic, counter-narcotic financing. And so I really would challenge current administration and future administrations. How can you use Ex-Im financing to help stop, and I'll quote Tom, clearly Beijing's out-of-reach financial system has been making cartels, and again, drug cartels, but cartels wide-ranging criminality possible, whether it be selling sex slaves, poisoning Americans with fentanyl, or retail theft in this country's cities. It's an axis of enemies waging a disguised war against the United States. An onslaught far different from the open warfare of Nazi Germany or the Cold War nuclear threat practiced for decades by the Soviet Union. So I challenge not only Ex-Im, but whole of government. Got to be working together, whole of government solutions, be it economic or national security or both combined.
Well, that's an excellent vision for the future that is relevant to the conversation today. You hit on some topics. We've done several episodes that are looking at China and the cartels, money laundering, and fentanyl and other things. The shoplifting angle is interesting. We might want to dig into that one a little bit more too, just because it just adds one more ornament to the Christmas tree of the do no gooding that is going on with that axis. And it's just absolutely correct. And also just reminding people that when they think of the different parts of government, a lot of times they'll only think of maybe the White House, the State Department, the intelligence community, the Defense Department, things like that. We have these other tools in our toolbox across government from time to time get attention, but we really do need to maximize use of these tools. And what you are talking about are getting the right kind of information and opportunity and financing to people to balance against some of these providers of or less desirable providers. It's just so important to what we try to accomplish in the future. But I'm grateful that you actually had that article to kind of put up here to tie a bow on how these things come together. But you kind of talked about coming into the job with the Belt and Road Initiative as kind of an animating topic. Many people that follow our podcast and talk about U.S.-China relations generally will know about this effort to get access to strategic ports, strategic minerals, going around in kind of the global south in some ways that shores up votes in the UN, could be used for other strategic purposes too. And there's very clear mission overlap for what you could do there. But these days, there's talk of other kinds of approaches, whether it is de-dollarization or pushing for the yuan or the renminbi as a more prominent global trade and finance currency. There's the BRICS as an international gathering that excludes the United States in many ways, has the intent of building out an international order that is competitive with, to the point of supplanting the America first or American dominant model. I would say that's not really fair in the sense that it's the free world model. It wasn't. I mean, America did lead, and America deserves some credit for the elbow grease and the finance and playing a large role. But it's really the free world, and a lot of the rest of this world benefited from it. So you begin with Belt and Road, but here we are today talking about BRICS and some of these other pieces. As you look at this path forward, how seriously do you take these alternative groupings, or what do you see as kind of the keys to America, whether it's executive branch, legislative branch, private sector, coming together with allies and partners to kind of endure this challenge and continue what has been a very, very beautiful human experiment, especially in the post-World War II era, of this blossoming of an America-led global opportunity society?
Absolutely. I'm very worried. When I was at Exim, the Republicans were in the minority in the House of Representatives, and they had the foresight to create something called the China Task Force. And now that we're in the majority, that China Task Force has become a select committee, and it's chaired by a great Congressman, Mike Gallagher. And yes. I was just listening, and I commend to your audience, go to their website at house.gov and subscribe to their press releases, because you will see all the activity, and it's bipartisan, which is refreshing, on China. And they're trying to highlight all of these issues. I know, Steve, when we were out in South Dakota, Congressman Gallagher was next door in Iowa talking about theft of U.S. seed by the Chinese that they take back to China and then copy and replicate, which hurts our farmers and our businesses, because we spend all the money on the research and R&D. But that's just only one topic. But Congressman Gallagher just last week said, and I quote, "It seems she, as in President Xi of China, is preparing for war." And the ranking Democrat, Krishnamurthy, said that he believes that America must be prepared for something called a preemptive attack. And so I don't know if you've talked about that on your podcast, but basically saying, we got to be ready for this. This is serious. And they use the example of what happened in Korea. China wants to invade Taiwan. They come and do a preemptive attack on us to kind of tell us brush back and not get involved. How are we going to handle that? And what are we going to do about that? And I really hope everyone in Congress and our whole country thinks about that. When I was at Exim, Robert O'Brien, our national security advisor, an outstanding leader, he's got a bright future. He knew that economic security was part of national security. So he put me on his plane, and we went and met with the president of Brazil, the prime minister of Vietnam, leaders in the Philippines, just all around the world, helping them understand, please pick America. And this is why. And I think that we need to take that not only to the leaders of these countries, but also to the citizens of these countries that are strategically important to us. I want to point out to your audience, the Atlantic Council Center for Freedom and Prosperity now has on their website, it's called the 2023 Freedom and Prosperity Index. And so if you have any foreign listeners, you can click on this, and on any country you can tap, and you can see how they score on freedom and on prosperity. And the aim of this is to help individuals understand, if you're in a free country and you support rule of law and all of these free democratic principles that America upholds, your prosperity is going to increase, and that's a good thing. So we also know that China thinks long term. And I love the Chinese people. I spent time in China at the International Food Information Council. I did food safety courses for every province in China with their FDA, their Food and Drug Administration, talking about safe food supply globally. But we gotta do all we can and use all tools we can on the economic front and national security front to prepare for something. It's alarming when you hear that you think someone's preparing for war, because this war could be devastating, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. So let's not get there.
Absolutely. Well, one of the key aims in trying to educate our public is to try to help them understand the scope of the challenges we face, and hopefully get their agreement to support building a new foundation for a revitalized America that is more resilient and prepared to meet any of these challenges. Because as Americans, we have a bit of a missionary impulse. We look out into the world, we see reasons for hope and cooperation. Our aspirational nature kind of tries to translate into the realities of our friends and counterparts overseas. And sometimes it's hard for us to see that there might be a different, sometimes darker logic that is running leaders in other parts of the world. And unfortunately, we do have to be prepared for these contingencies. We do have to move away from dependencies that would get in the way of a morally and strategically correct response in a time of need. And so we need to be better prepared ourselves, have our allies better prepared, but hopefully even be able to help get the Chinese people themselves to know what we're really about and the better opportunities they would have if not under risky leadership that's seeking these conflicts. Because we certainly don't go out into the world looking for a new fight. Like you were in your job, you're out there looking for the next opportunity to move freedom and prosperity forward. And that's basically the American ideal, the American way. So I just want to thank you for your service to the country and putting your oar in the water and pulling on this more broadly than the China part. But it was very clear from your introduction to the job and what came of it subsequently, and the experience you had under COVID that actually kind of came from China and was affected by things in China too. You ended up dealing with a lot more China stuff than might have looked at first blush on paper. But Kimberly, as people look at this episode and get some of your recommendations on career advice and the information you were perusing, where should they go to follow your commentary and your work?
I'm on LinkedIn, so you can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm not really engaged in social media, but you can find me on LinkedIn.
It's probably a mentally healthier approach to the world to be sort of minimalist in your engagement on social media, but definitely want to invite the audience to connect and follow those conversations. Just can't say enough about the breadth of experience that Kimberly's brought to this conversation, and look forward to continued fine work together in the future. But to our audience, if you've enjoyed today's China Desk conversation, please tell your friends and consider subscribing on YouTube and on your preferred podcast platform. Thank you for joining us today, and a special thank you to Kimberly Reed for sharing her perspective. Until next time, I'm Steve Yates, your host here at the China Desk.
Thank you for listening to the China Desk podcast, presented by the Federal Newswire and hosted by Steve Yates. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.